There you
Okay.
go.
Welcome to Cheryl and Seth, who are joining us online. As I said, my name is Adam Fletcher Sasse. Today I'm talking about the history of the Jewish community in North Omaha. It's going to be rip, rocking, and rolling. There's a few important points that I wanted to make sure to get across before we get going. Some caveats, as it were. As you all know, I am, well, maybe you don't know, but long story short is I'm I am a lover of this history. This is not my job. This is not what I get paid for. And I do all of this out of my own interest. That said, I walk on toes routinely. I get things wrong all the time. And I am not trying to pretend to be expert history guy. Some people will call me things. Author is one of them. Jill has a copy of my latest book if you want to look at it after we're done. Or maybe she could pass it around so everybody could peek at it. Whatever moves you. But long story short is I really, really like this history. That said, here's some important points. The first one is I am not Jewish. I do not know what I'm talking about when I talk about the Jewish faith, about the history of Jews in the long run. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Omaha's Jewish history. There are a couple of very esteemed experts, and I'm going to mention one of them in just a second, but the place where I come at this from is as a North Omaha historian, and knowing the importance of Jews in North Omaha, I felt it was very important to bring this history out. I do offer the most comprehensive free history about Jewish people in North Omaha today. So I am asked to do this presentation. This is probably my fourth time in 20 years that I've done it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I've learned. I have had an article published in an academic journal on Jewish history in North Omaha. And it was published in a Jewish history academic journal. So I take that as a little bit of bona fides. But also, I've met with a variety of Jewish people in Omaha about their history over a period of time. And I'm proud to say that not necessarily stamp of approval. I don't know that any one Jewish person can give me a stamp of approval, but I have had people tell me that I get it right. So I want to share all of this with that caveat. The fourth thing that I'll say is that the experts in Omaha's Jewish history are at the Nebraska Jewish Historical Society, which is out at the Jewish Community Center, which I suggest all of you go and see if you're remotely interested in Jewish history in North Omaha or in Omaha in general. Go check out the Nebraska Jewish Historical Society. They have a beautiful museum, and it's really, really neat. Oliver Pollock is the expert on Omaha's Jewish history, and I defer to him on everything. So I want to make sure that I get all the props over to him. A few words that I wanted to find before we get going. I promise not to use them very much because I'm still a little bit leery about getting them right. But Beth is the Hebrew word meaning house. It's used sometimes for a Jewish house of worship. And you'll hear me use that. Kosher means to literally, it means proper or correct. It's how Jews describe their food laws, their dietary laws. A shul is a Yiddish term for a Jewish house of worship. It's used primarily by Orthodox Jews. They don't really use it much anymore, but a shul. And then a synagogue, of course, is the most widely accepted term for a Jewish house of worship. Again, these are important points before I get going. And let's just jump in. I want to start with this view. Check this out. I just found this out in the last year. It's a view east from Prospect Hill at 33rd and Parker, and it's looking over the entirety of the near north side, almost the entirety. But you get a sense. The big building in the distance is the Stores Brewery at 16th and Charles. If you looked at that same neighborhood today, you'd see it's pockmarked by empty spaces and all kinds of stuff that doesn't exist anymore. But what we don't see in this photo, but is absolutely true, is that this view holds a lot of North Omaha's Jewish community. A lot of the synagogues and shuls and other institutions that were so important, and the businesses all around. So I want you to really take this in and understand this is Jewish North Omaha. Now, you might understand it in a couple different ways. If you're a student of North Omaha's history, if you've heard me talk in this space here before, or read any of my books, or seen NorthOmahaHistory.com or any of the other things, you'll know that the near north side was also home to Omaha's historic African American community. From about the 1890s until today, it's been the segregated black neighborhood in Omaha in general. You'll know that this same photo holds what was called Little Scandinavia on Florence Boulevard, south of Lake. Little Scandinavia. It was its own thing. There was also a Swedish area that was called Little Stockholm that was down on Davenport and about 24th. Little Italy is in this photo. Oh, wait a second, Adam. Little Italy south of downtown. Well, that's one Little Italy. That's the Little Italy for people who are from southern Italy. The people who are from northern Italy lived on also on 20th Street, down by Charles. And so you have a whole amalgam right here between 33rd Street and let's say 11th, from Sprague Street all the way south to Cumming, all the way south to Cass. And that amalgam included North Omaha's Jewish community. This is the messiest timeline I could throw together in the last 4 hours. But it's more comprehensive, again, than anything I've found online. Check this out with me. Let's start with an overview of what this history actually looked like. You'll see that in 1867, so the city of Omaha was founded, it was roughly established in 1854, then it was incorporated in 1856 as a town, then it became a city in 1857. So it has those early roots. Some of the very first Jewish settlers in Omaha were the brothers Max and Julius Meyer. The Meyer brothers opened a store in downtown Omaha, and they were famous for selling goods that went all across the western United States. But the Myers Brothers store eventually sold and specialized in selling Native American stuff. They actually brought in Indians from across Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas and South Dakota to come to the store and sell their goods right there to Mr. Myers himself. Max Meyer became very important in Omaha for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being that he said to his fellow countrymen, hey, come to this city. We're going to make it happen. For the next several years, actually, for the next several decades, people came and came. Jewish people came. The first Jewish cemetery in Omaha started in 1872, so that you could see in just those 5 years between the Myers showing up and 1872, there were enough of a Jewish population to start a cemetery for Jews. Now, why did Jews need their own cemetery, Adam? Well, there's a couple of distinct reasons, not the least of which being that they have very specific ceremonies that are very simple, that require an appropriate space. But also, it was not okay among many Omahans to include Jews in regular daily activities outside of the marketplace. We're going to talk about that more as we go along, but I just want to plant that seed. There was a Jewish cemetery started in North Omaha because Omaha didn't want Jews buried in its cemeteries otherwise. That cemetery was originally called Pleasant Hill, and it was established on North 42nd. Now, some of you know it today as Temple Israel Cemetery. It's over by McMillan. And the Temple Israel Cemetery, again, 1872. So, boom, we're off and running. 1883, the first synagogue was established in North Omaha specifically. The first synagogue in Omaha was established in 1871, but in 1883, the first North Omaha synagogue was established. One thing to understand about the Jewish community, and if I'm speaking wrong and if anybody knows better than me, please speak up or send me a note in the chat or whatever you want to do. But one thing to know is that among Jews, there are three major different Jewish groups. There's the Orthodox, there's the Reform, and there's the Conservative. Conservative or Orthodox. Anyway, there's three major groups. And the point is that among those groups even, and I can't explain to you all the differences of them, but among those groups, for a long time, there were ethnic differences that divided folks. And those ethnic differences had to do with where in Eastern Europe or in Europe in general, or even from the Middle East, folks came. And that first synagogue that was established in North Omaha was in the Jefferson Square neighborhood because that's where a lot of Hungarian Jews settled into Omaha. And these Hungarian Jews started their own synagogue on 19th Street. We're going to get into its history in a little while. By 1886, in just 3 more years, there was a new flood of synagogues getting started in North Omaha. And before 1926, 6 different synagogues claimed their roots in North Omaha. We're going to name them in a little while. And again, this is an overview, but for the sake of telling you. Now, that whole point about discrimination, this comes around again in 1898 very flagrantly. Again, Jews weren't welcomed in the everyday life of Omaha and North Omaha as a community. Instead, they had to have their own institutions. And again, one of them was this Wise Memorial Hospital. Now, we're going to talk about Wise and we're going to get into its name and where it was and all the things, but just know that the first and only Jewish hospital in Omaha history was started in North Omaha on 16th Street. One of the scions of the Brandeis family, you remember Jonas Brandeis started a big store downtown that eventually came to be called Brandeis. Um, his beautiful building is still standing today. But of course, the department store is long gone. Anyway, one of the scions of the family, his name was Emil Brandeis, and he died in 1912 on the Titanic. He was Omaha's only loss on the Titanic. He was buried at the Temple Israel Cemetery, then known as Prospect or Pleasant Hill, and you can see his gravestone today. Now, here's an interesting little factoid. 1913, everybody remembers the story of the big Easter Sunday tornado. It plowed through North Omaha, hit from Hamilton all the way out at 40th, and then came around and moved down the way and got into Gifford Park and messed up Duchesne Academy, and then came around a little bit more and eventually landed at 24th and Lake, where it killed more than 100 people in that immediate area around 24th and Lake. At that point, it was 1913, it was a very integrated neighborhood. Not only economically integrated, there were massive mansions. I'm talking about 4,000 square feet at the time when the average house had 900 square feet. 4,000 square foot, big mansions right next to, on the other side of the block, 900 square foot houses, little shotgun style houses. And not only economically integrated, but also racially integrated. So you had Jewish people living next to Black people, living next to European Americans, living next to new European immigrants, and they were all mixed up together. And in 1913, that tornado came mercilessly and just plowed into that neighborhood, destroyed a lot of buildings that, interestingly enough, never recovered. But that's another detail for a different day. Lots of them did recover, and the 24th and Lake area was rebuilt. But when that tornado happened, Jews had to start their own relief station. They had to have their own place that was dispersing food and clothing and helping folks get new shelter just for Jews. Now, why was that? We'll get into that later. 1919. Again, if you're a student of this North Omaha history, you'll know that 1919 was the year of the Will Brown lynching in downtown Omaha at the courthouse. When those mobs turned north, they were going to start wrecking up the black houses and targeting African Americans specifically. And that scared the bejesus out of a lot of North Omahans who did not identify as African American. And the near north side, a phenomenon that had never happened in Omaha before started to happen, and it was called white flight. For the first time ever, white people said, oh my gosh, I shouldn't live here, and they started to evacuate the near north side. Now, we're going to talk about the near north side. What does that mean? What does it look like? The whole thing. But just know that's when white flight began, was 1919. I put a note in here from 1926 when one of the Jewish synagogues was built at 25th and Seward. But I put it specifically in here because it's fascinating to me, because it's one of only two former Jewish synagogues that still stand in North Omaha today. When we're done today, you could go drive by 25th and Seward over by the Creighton Medical Facility and see this old Jewish synagogue as it looked when it was built in 1926. We're going to show some pictures of that in a little while. 1943, white flight accelerated, took off. Why did that happen? Well, we'll get into that. And in 1966, this was really the beginning of the end of the Jewish community in North Omaha. 3 years of rioting led to approximately 75% of Jewish-owned businesses, Jewish-owned buildings on North 24th Street and other places around North Omaha being demolished. And that's when it all came to an end. Now, I'm not going to say that the riots demolished those buildings, and you're going to hear a different word about that in a little while. But this is kind of an overview of the big timeline, just to give you a sense of what the scope is of what we're talking about. As usual, as we go along, if anybody has any questions or comments or concerns or criticisms or thoughts to add that's really gerrymandered to the conversation, just jump in here. I'm going to leave the sound off for or I'm going to leave the sound on for Mount Olive. So if you guys speak up at all, I'll be able to hear you. And if you're joining us online, please drop a chat or otherwise raise your hand, use that little thing in Zoom, and we'll continue that way. Now, I
Adam,
want to talk about these three elements.
Adam,
Yeah.
what are you defining as North Omaha?
Thank you. Always the good question. Of course, North Omaha is everything in Adam's book, and it's important to remember Adam's 5 published books and 8 total that are available online, and I got several for free. So if you're interested in that, go check them out. But in all of these books, I define North Omaha's everything north of Dodge up to the Washington County line, everything east of 72nd all the way over to the river. So it's this entire mass, and I'm gonna cut this up a little bit in just a couple of slides, but just kind of by way of background, that's what I'm talking about. Anybody else? Thanks for that question. I appreciate it. So to get going on this, I want to paint a picture of 3 different elements that are going to come across in this presentation. One element are the communities that made up Jewish North Omaha. Now, North Omaha has more than one Jewish community when it was alive and vibrant. And those communities were made of their own roots. They had their own identities, whether it was language-based, place-based in terms of where the immigrant populations came from, or economically based. And all of those had roles that factored into North Omaha's overall Jewish population, but really identified those different Jewish communities. All that's different today, but those roots are still there. I want to talk about relationships. The Jewish people in North Omaha weren't alone. Instead, they were tied together with other people throughout all of North Omaha, particularly the near north side. We're going to jump into that a little bit. And then finally, we're going to get into legacies. There are still marks of North Omaha's Jewish community, Jewish history throughout the community, and we're going to talk about those as well. Now, to that question from just a moment ago, Jewish North Omaha, different from North Omaha. You can see in my little map here the boundaries. I don't push this all the way north up to Washington County line because at some point there's very few lines, squiggly lines, to make up those streets in the Ponca Hills. But you could see on the left side of this graphic, that's 72nd Street. And on the right side, you can kind of see Abbott Drive bump over there. On the bottom is Dodge Street, that's marked as Highway 6 inside those little lavender boxes. And then on the north, that dark line is I-680. Why do I have red dashes through all of that, Adam? Well, let me tell you, it's annoying to refer to myself in the third person, but also those red dashes are to indicate that those were not Jewish North Omaha. Those are generally not places considered as Jewish neighborhoods or residences even. There were a few anomalies. Florence actually had some Jewish population that I mentioned in my book called Rock Bottom, a history of the history of Florence, Nebraska. But more importantly, they were anomalous. Those were rare. And same thing with the rest of the area around North Omaha. It was rare to have Jewish residents. Really, the Jewish North Omaha was 2 areas, and they happened at different points. Before 1920, you see the box on the right, the lavender box. It goes from about Locust Street down to Dodge. I put it all the way down there for entertainment value. But that's really where the Jewish population originated in North Omaha. It ends at about 33rd Street or so, maybe a little bit west of that, but you get the idea. Then the other Jewish North Omaha is from Dodge Street north up to about Blondo, from around Radial Highway west out to 72nd. But it wasn't always the case that was it. And each of these neighborhoods had different dynamics, where at one point there might have been red dashes even within those lavender boxes. The segregation of Jewish people from the rest of Omaha wasn't always overt. It was actually very subversive at times, where it was just kind of a wink and a nod. Jews don't live here. We don't allow Jews in our country club. Jewish people had to have their own country club in Omaha because the rest of the country clubs wouldn't allow Jewish members. And this continued. Now, that Jewish Country Club, of course, was way out west and not included in my presentation, but for the sake of illustration, you really see a segregation that happened. Sometimes it was self-imposed. Jewish people saying to other Jewish people, this is where we live, this is what we do. I'm going to explain why in a minute and what that looked like. But the important part to understand is that Jewish North Omaha wasn't all of North Omaha the way that Adam defines it. Instead, it was these very specific areas. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? Here we go. This area that I want to talk about first, of course, is the near north side. For 70 years, Omaha's Jewish population was concentrated into this area. From Dodge Street north up to Locust, from about 14th Street all the way west over to 30th and 33rd, like I'd said earlier. That doesn't mean there weren't Jewish populations elsewhere. There was. They were in South Omaha. They were downtown. But the majority of Omaha's Jewish population was in this area. Now, the near north side as a defined neighborhood is a little bit tricky because the boundaries of it kept changing over and over. From 1854 to 1865, it was this one little area. And you can see on my map, I drew this map, so, you got to eat it up. It's that authentic, kind of rough hewn look that I'm going for. Anyway, over at 16th and Dodge, and it actually, the near north side was all the way over to 11th Street. This was the area that was defined as being predominantly Black and predominantly Jewish in those early years from 1854 to 1865. You can see the second area that was included bumped all the way over to 24th Street. And that's really when Jews began to build out their population in this area. That included Cass Street all the way up to Cumming. And all of these areas, lots of Hungarian Jews, lots of Russian Jews started to come in at that point. But really, the majority of Jewish people in North Omaha, their identities were formed on the East Coast. They were early immigrants to the States, to New York City and to other states back east. And they migrated to Omaha in those first pioneer years, decades, and were really some of the first settlers in the city. You can see the second and third areas. The third area begins to bump up north of Cumming Street, almost all the way to Grace Street. And it was kind of this little area east of 24th Street, west of 20th, but this became the near north side. And remember, near north side was used as a synonym for Black and Jewish. Near north side was used as a synonym for Black and Jewish. You still had near north side Scandinavians and near north side Italians, like I talked about, but for the most part, it was a synonym for Black and Jewish. So the neighborhood kept expanding its boundaries as WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, moved out, and Jewish and Black people took over more and more of the space, as it were. And that's the fourth area. Between 1900 and 1910, it really expanded to include all of that green area. That's south of Grace Street, north of Cumming, north of Dodge, and in between 16th and 30th, roughly. That's the freeway that's shown here, but you get the idea. And then the final definition of the near north side was between 1910 and 1980. It really expanded out, and it included all these areas up to Locust, all the way over to 30th, all the way over to 14th Street. And it was really that entire region was Black and Jewish, identified as that. There was actually a point in the 1970s when the Black community said to the media, stop using the term near north side because you just mean Black people. And inside of that illustration, inside of the orange areas here on the map, by this point in the 1980s, this entire region was African American, predominantly Black. And by predominant, I mean almost zero population of white people, let alone Jewish people. Jewish people were by and large gone from the near north side by the 1960s and 70s. So this was the Jewish concentration in North Omaha. But what does that really mean? What does that really look like? Well, I'm glad to say that it looked like it was, to be Jewish isn't just the religion. It's not just the faith. It's actually an ethnic identity that extends thousands of years back and has very distinct identifiable traits and behaviors and history of its own. Of course, the faith is tied up in it. and Jewish people should speak for themselves and know for themselves their own history. And again, I won't do this right, but for the sake of illustration, I want you to understand these were the North Omaha synagogues. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 different names of the Jewish synagogues. Now, some of these are repetitious. Some of them aren't written quite right. I drew them all from official sources, whether that was a newspaper or a certificate or other document. But I have yet to sit down with Oliver Pollock and be straightened out about all of these. In the meantime, just know a lot of synagogues existed in North Omaha in that boundary that I painted out earlier. Beth Hamidrash Adas Jeshurun, B'nai Jacob Adas Yeshurun, Sher Zion Synagogue, also called the Rakes Shul, B'nai Jacob Adas Yashurun, also known as the Kepler Shul, B'nai Jacob, Beth Hamdrash Haggadol, Beth Hamdrash Adas Yashurun. There was a lot of combining of synagogues that happened. Shever B'nai Israel Adas Rusha, B'nai Jacob Anshe Shalom, Beth Hamdrash Haggadol, also called the Lidvish Shul. This is Adam slaughtering words. B'nai Israel, later called B'nai Israel Synagogue, the Temple Israel. Congregation Shovei Zayo, Midrash Haggadol, also known as the Shebra Israel, and the Hungarian congregation. I'm going to show some pictures of these next. But the point being, and the labor of saying all that, is to say that all of these shuls and synagogues had different identities, had different ethnic groups and languages and histories of their own. Here we see a pair of the different synagogues. Beth Hamdrash sat down on Cass Street. Sher Zion was over on 22nd. Beth Hamdrash was a huge facility, a huge building that had several classrooms, a beautiful synagogue, a beautiful sanctuary, and just a wonderful facility. It was demolished in the 1960s. Sher Zion was a humble space that moved several times and ended up joining in with other synagogues. You can see here the B'nai Jacob Synagogue. Now, this is a story that is worth telling for many reasons, not the least of which being that it's such a dynamic and big story. B'nai Jacob was started as early as the 1886, and their first formal synagogue was located at 1109 North 24th Street, or 24th and Hamilton. You can see this picture here on the left. That building wasn't built as a synagogue, though. It was a big wooden church when it was first built that was called Second Presbyterian Church. Second Presbyterian was built in 1881, and it housed a large congregation that ended up merging with another Presbyterian church to form North Presbyterian. North Presbyterian eventually became Calvin Memorial Presbyterian, and today that building is being repurposed. It's at 24th and Wirt and stands today. It's a beautiful facility. But it started out in this wood frame church that became B'nai Jacob. Now, B'nai Jacob wasn't content on having that building, and they ended up building a brick building at that same location, 24th and Hamilton. I'm embarrassed that I have a typo here where it says 1848. That picture's from 1948, obviously. Look at that streetcar coming down the way. This is 24th and Hamilton in 1948. How busy and vibrant that is, with cars moving up and down the street, with buildings lining the entirety of 24th Street, all the way north and south. Today, none of that exists anymore. It's all gone. But what happened to this synagogue? This story gets interesting because in 1948, they physically moved the building from 24th and Hamilton to about 32nd and Cumming. You'll see that photo in 1955 shows the same synagogue in place. Now that those rows of, in the picture on the left, the newspaper picture that's so grainy, those rows of windows We don't really get to see them here in 1948 or in 1955. But if you look in 2020, wait a second, 2020, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, that building still stands today. It's the second of the two synagogues that still stand, the historical synagogue buildings that still stand in North Omaha. However, you could see here on the far right, as it stands today, when you drive up Cumming Street today, which you might go do, just go down 30th, take a right on Cumming, and look on your right-hand side before you get to the underpass going over to Old Tech. You'll see this building standing there. It's clad in aluminum siding, but you can see the way that the pattern of the building repeats from the photo on the right to the the photo in the middle from 1955. It has the same entryway. They've taken off the tall piece on the top of the building, and it's very simple now, but it's definitely the same structure, just moved over. Big news when it happened. So yeah, go check that out. 30th and Cumming, just east or west of the intersection. Now, there were Jewish institutions all over North Omaha. And when I say institution, I mean specifically Jewish facilities for Jewish people. This is how thick North Omaha was with Jewish people. Again, for 70 years. There was a funeral home built just for Jewish people in the 1980s at 44th and Cumming. The building's still there. I don't know if it's still the same facility, but the building's still there at 4415 Cumming Street. I'm going to show you a picture of it in just a moment. A Jewish old people's home was opened up at 2504 Charles Street, 25th and Charles in the near North Side neighborhood. And with that, a ritual bathhouse was attached with it on 25th Street. I'm going to show you pictures of all this in just a minute. I mentioned Wise Memorial Hospital early on. That was on Sherman Avenue, which, of course, we call 16th Street today, but that was historically Sherman Avenue. The Jewish Home for the Aged was opened on North 20th, right by Dodge Street. Jewish funeral home, the original Jewish funeral home, or what, the second Jewish funeral home for Omaha, was opened at 19th and Cumming. And I'm going to show you a photo of that in a minute. The Jewish Tornado Relief Station that I mentioned was on 24th Street, south of Hamilton. Oh, I'm sorry, just north of Hamilton, my bad. But right in that area. Golden Hill Cemetery, we're going to talk about that in a little while. Pleasant Hill, aka the Temple Israel Cemetery on 42nd. And then just as a note, I put in here, Omaha University has an important history. And again, I believe that we mentioned it when I did my History of Education North Omaha presentation. But Omaha University, of course, today we call the University of Nebraska at Omaha. It was established in North Omaha at 24th and Pratt. And it was there in 1923 at 24th and Pratt where Aleph Zadok Aleph, the men's order of the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization, started in North Omaha. Today, B'nai B'rith, of course, continues and is very popular nationwide and around the world. But Omaha University left North Omaha in 1939. Oh, there was something else happening right then. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's take a look at some of those institutions, one of them being the Wise Memorial Hospital. Shown here is a picture of the second Wise Memorial Hospital that was at 2225 Sherman Avenue. Now, this house, you love it, don't you? It's Italianate styling, it was called. It was built by a man named J.J. Brown. He was a successful grocer. He was one of those warehousers in downtown Omaha who stocked the wagons that headed west. I love these stories. I eat them up. And I'm working on a really long form biography of J.J. Brown right now, but you could see a little bit about him and about his specific mansion that was on 16th Street. Now, in your mind's eye, just kind of picture that area, north of the Stores Brewery, south of Lake. At one point, that whole cliff on 16th looked over the Missouri River Valley. There was a clear shot of the entire valley. And these wealthy guys would come into this area and they would build their mansions lining 16th Street. Several of them had them there. J.J. Brown, A.J. Poppleton, the lawyer who became really important in Omaha's history. Several other guys. There was a guy whose last name was escaping me right now. Anyway, lots of mansions on 16th Street. This was one of them. these guys wanted these big palatial houses that looked over the river valley that showed the people who were visiting how wonderful their view was because they were very wealthy. His mansion was built in the 1870s. In 1901, it was bought by the Jews to become the Wise Memorial Hospital. 1902, it was bought for that purpose. The hospital itself was opened up further north, up by Locust Street in 1901. In 1908, they had a purpose-built building that was made somewhere else in Omaha. I like to call everything else outside of North Omaha somewhere else because really, what does it matter? But that building even itself is gone now. But regardless, the Wise Memorial, the Jewish hospital, continued to exist in Omaha for more than 30 years after it was started in North Omaha. Another institution in North Omaha was the Jewish Old People's Home. It was at 25th and Charles. And here's a picture of it. An unostentatious house, very simple. But it was open from 1916 to 1940 and served a really specific goal of keeping old people who either didn't have family or didn't have money safe and warm and well cared for. Interesting side note, all of the residents of old folks' homes, and this is their term, not mine. I would never call something an old people's home or an old folks' home, but all the residents are referred to in the paper as inmates. So locking Granny up and throwing away the key might have actually been a thing. I don't know. Also, it's important to note here that the Jewish old folks home, of course, was for Jewish old folks because they were taking care of their own community. But it's also important to note that African Americans had an old folks home just for Black people that was over at 30th and Parker, that existed right around the same time as the Jewish old people's home. So that segregation and that relationship between Black people and Jewish people was strong because both of them were segregated from Omaha's mainstream population of WASPs and people who didn't identify religiously. The Jewish Funeral Home, this was the first major facility built for Jews to do their specific funeral activities. And now the first one, the large one, was at 19th and Cumming. You could see the sign off on the left side of the picture. Oh, and look right there. You could make a phone call from your car. How deluxe was that? This picture was taken in 1983. You remember those, right? You pulled up to them and it was a whole thing. Anyway, side note, I remember my point of pride when I got the AT&T calling card that allowed me to call home or call anybody that I wanted to on the payphone without quarters. Oh, those were the good old days. Anyway, upper right hand, you see that building that I mentioned at 44th and Cumming. That building still stands today. It was built to replace the original institution here. And the building still stands. I don't know its purpose anymore, but it's still there. And then here are three other institutions worth mentioning that are important to Jewish history in North Omaha. On the left is Golden Hill Cemetery. It's over near 42nd and Grand. You can go and visit the cemetery today. It's beautiful. And it's technically full. There are thousands of burials there. And you walk in and it's a tight space for cemetery stones. You might remember a few years ago, there was an incident where it was vandalized and hundreds of gravestones were knocked over by vandals who attacked the cemetery. I think that's all the more reason to understand its history and how important it is to North Omaha. Again, that cemetery was started in 1888 and is still open today for viewing. The ceremonial bathhouse was right near the old people's home over at 25th and Charles, right around there. And here's a photo of it right there. You can see the whole photo for this on my website at northomahahistory.com. And then on the left, you can see a picture of the 8th grade class at Lake School in 1914. Now, I picked this photo because it shows a couple of interesting things, not let alone a very cool hat or two and some great plaid on the dress. Don't be jealous of that picnic tablecloth dress. It's styling for 1914. But you'll also notice there's an African-American student, very particularly in the upper right-hand corner of the shot. Less discernible is the reality that the majority of these students might have been Jewish. You can see a young man in the bottom left-hand corner who's wearing a bowler hat, as well as several, almost all the young men are in suits. but this is very identifiable from the time. Lake School was open from 1879 to 1979 at 20th and Lake Streets. And you can find a history of that school on my website at northomahahistory.com as well. I would be remiss not to mention the vast array of Jewish businesses in North Omaha. Jews did so much for North Omaha's economic basis. They really made it happen for decades. First, they were the originators of the 24th Street business corridor, but not only 24th Street. Jewish business owners built businesses on North 20th Street, North 19th, Cummings Street itself, Cass Street, and beyond. You'll notice that I didn't put North 16th Street here. I couldn't find any history of Jewish businesses, historically speaking, on North 16th Street. That doesn't mean they weren't there. It just means that I didn't find them. You'll notice this picture of an interior of a meat market. It was a kosher meat market that sold specifically to Jews in the near north side. Some great work on this was shared by Oliver Pollock in his book on Jewish history in North Omaha, or in Omaha. I encourage you to check it out. I love to put this picture of 24th and Willis in here because I colorized it, and that's always exciting. I didn't colorize it. I ran it through AI, but you get the point. What you see here is an amalgam of Jewish-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, and other people-owned businesses in terms of white people that didn't identify as Jewish. Ed Holman Sherman was a popular dry cleaners right near 24th and Lake. Willis is 1 block south of Lake. So what you're actually looking at, you see the gentleman standing in the middle of the street. You see the car in the middle of the street beyond him. That is 24th and Lake right there. There are 4 different cleaners at this intersection. You can visibly see 2 of them, Ed Holman Sherman, like I'd mentioned, but also Emerson was another cleaners that was right there. There was another one called the Boston Wash, and then a 4th one that I don't remember the name of off the top of my head. There were gas stations. There were all kinds of different businesses right here. On the corner of 24th and Willis, off on the right-hand side of the photo, if you look really hard, you can see a sign that says 16 cents. Above that, there's a sign that says Mobile Gas. It has a Pegasus, a horse with wings, off on the right-hand side of that photo. That building still stands at 24th and Willis today, as well as the building across the street from it with the 20-cent sign in it. The building across the street from that, it's tall, has a Coca-Cola sign on it. I call that the Childs building, Jones and Childs. It was an undertaker, a black undertaker for about 20 years, and then became a whole series of different businesses. That building still stands today. And then to the left of that, the Robbins Drugstore was a black-owned drugstore. That building still stands today as well as the one next to it. And in between the Jones and Childs 2-story building and the drug sign, you can see a dormer sticking out. That is actually a 2-story building that back then was a funeral home that still stands today. It was an African-American owned funeral home, but the building itself was owned by Jewish people. Same with the Robbins Drug building. Same with the Ed Holman Sherman building. Jews owned a lot of real estate on North 24th Street, and they continued to for about another 20 or 30 years after this photo was taken. Here's some other Jewish-owned businesses that were in North Omaha: Zucker's Milliner, Heimelblum Bakery, and the Summit Bookstore that sold Jewish books and other religious articles. Jewish businesses abounded, 200 at least. I have a list. It's ridiculous. Here's a sample of what some of the businesses were and where they were at. The Micklin Lumber Company, a lot of people are still familiar with that old building that was down at 19th and Nicholas. That actually started at 2109 North 24th Street, and the building still stands today. The Ideal Hotel later became the Ideal Furniture and Ideal Hardware at 24th. It's 24th in Ohio. That building still stands today. The Forbes Bakery at 2711 North 24th Street. That's at 24th in Miami. That building still stands today. Birdstein Groceries and Meats at 4901 North 16th still stands today. So you get a sense that there were a lot of different kinds of businesses, but that several of the buildings still stand today. It's kind of cool. Donsky's Garage. Hans Donsky was actually a Swedish Jew. Fascinating stuff wrapped in here. Spiegel's Junkyard was one of the predominant businesses on North 24th Street for more than 50 years. And Spiegel was a very influential guy. Milton Maper had a clothing store. Wolk the barber, Wolk the tailor. They were brothers who worked next door to each other. Kosher market, confectionery. You get the idea. Lots going on here in that business community. Of course, the community is no more than the people who are in it. And the Jewish community in North Omaha was comprised of families you might still be aware of today. One of the most popular families, one of the most popular names, of course, was none other than Rose Blumpkin herself, Mrs. B. Her house at 2809 Seward Street is still standing today. Now, she didn't live there a long time, but she landed there, and that's where she got it going, and that's where she ran her furniture mart for a little while, was from the basement of her home before she moved downtown. But lots of Jewish families had their roots in North Omaha. Some of the notable North Omaha Jews include Max Baer, who is a world boxing champion, Rose Blumpkin, Marty Epstein, who is a musician and composer, still alive, Brian Greenberg, still alive. We moved down the list a little bit. You could see that Lawrence Klein, the economist, I think he's passed recently, actually. Julie Newman, who founded the Hinky Dinky grocery chain from North Omaha. John Rosenblatt lived in North Omaha. Ed Zarinsky lived in North Omaha. Tilly Olson was a feminist author who actually started a movement for feminism in writing. She was from North Omaha. Harry Monsky, who started B'nai B'rith from North Omaha. So here we are. We come around to this point. This is the end of the presentation. There are a couple of things that I want to make sure that I point out here at the end. One of the most fascinating books that I've ever seen on any history in Omaha is called Our Story. And it's a collection of Omaha's early Jewish community stories. They're oral histories that are all compiled into a book. The book is out of print, but you can get used copies off of Amazon. And if you're interested at all, I'd really suggest it. It makes for some fascinating reading. But it's also a pattern. It provides a template for how we can collect more oral histories. After a goofy guy far away writes a book about Florence's history, the next logical step would be to get the oral histories from the people who actually remember Florence. But the Jews laid a template for us, and I think that this book provides some great, interesting stuff. I'd mentioned Oliver Pollock. You unfortunately can't see his whole book cover right here, but in the bottom right-hand corner, he did one of those cool pictorial histories of Omaha's Jewish community with lots of beautiful pictures, and you can get that at any bookstore downtown, at the Durham Museum, lots of places. And then, of course, my article is just waiting online for you to read. It has details about all the things that I mentioned today, all these different institutions, many of the different businesses, lots of the families, and really starts to unpack that and open it up. My name's Adam Fletcher Sasse, and this has been a history of the Jewish community in North Omaha. I want to open up the floor. We've got a few minutes. Does anybody have any questions about the Jewish community in North Omaha? Or let's just make it wide open and field anything that comes to your mind. Questions, comments, concerns, considerations, ideas, thoughts, anything at all. Cheryl and Seth, I invite you to unmute yourself, ask any questions that you have.
Where did the
Go ahead.
I have a question. Is there a Jewish community in Omaha now?
Thank you, Jill. I probably should have mentioned that first. So the Jewish community in Omaha is humongous. It's more successful today than it's ever been before. They're part of the Tri-Faith Initiative, and they have a beautiful campus, the Jewish Community Center and Temple Israel. They're out in West Omaha. And I had mentioned the Jewish Historical Foundation, the Nebraska Jewish Historical Foundation, is also located in the Tri-Faith Initiative campus. At the Jewish Community Center, they have a brand new museum there that's just beautiful. So they're definitely very vibrant community that is very active and has a lot of their own history capturing going on, a lot of history teaching, and a lot of great information. one of the better histories of Jews in Nebraska overall was done by Oliver Polak, who's still alive and kicking. And it's available on YouTube. You can watch it. Else, that video is available also on as a link on my website. So make sure you check that out if you're really interested. But yeah, very present, very active, very busy. Other questions? I mean, I guess you don't want to hear me brag about the warm sun beating down on my face right now. It might be 50 degrees out when I go outside. The dew has definitely all melted away. I've got my chickens walking around the backyard. I can go about that for an hour. I'm here in my tiny cabin in the backyard, and it's fantastic Oregon stuff. But you know, that's all boring. What history stuff do you want to know? That was supposed to be a humble brag. It came too braggy. Yes, please.
I looked it up and the 44th and Cumming is still the Jewish funeral home.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mark.
And I can tell you that our story is available at the Omaha Public Library.
Love it. Other questions, comments, concerns, considerations, ideas, anything at all? All right, y'all. Well then, Jill is going to be telling you our next topic, and Jill, the next presentation will be in March? April. And she'll share that topic out with you as soon as we get that all figured out. If you have any ideas for topics, feel free to share them with Jill. I'm always open to more ideas. Jill wanted to hear this one, and it's exciting for me. I love this history of the Jewish community specifically, if only because it was such a mystery to me growing up. People talked about it. I went to Pearl Church as a teenager, and people there, they remember 24th and Fort as being the center of the Pearl community, but they also really revered and held the history of the community overall, the large history, and they talked about Jewish people, and I didn't see it. I didn't know it. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so into it. So check out the website and let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to our next time together. Thank you all so very much. Check out NorthOmahaHistory.com for more details. Bye. Bye, everybody.